So welcome to my top 10 controllers of all time. Yes, I'm going to go through all of those controllers today from all the different companies over the years. First party controllers only for this one. And years ago, I did an episode with Rob and we looked at all of the controllers that were released for all these consoles over the years, and we played them all. We've used them all, and we kind of went through them all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I came to my favorite controller of all time, and I want to say it has changed now. Over the years since that video, it has changed, and I'll get to my favorite controller of all time. And I'll ask you, guys out there, what is your favorite controller of all time? One that you love, you stick with, you can't get enough of, you have to always use, you wish future consoles would adopt those older controllers, vice versa, or you just like the new controllers. Let me know down below. Now, this was a very difficult list for me to come up with because I like so many controllers. So just because it's not in my top 10 here doesn't mean I don't like it, but it got me thinking as well about all the controllers I hate and that I don't like and I've had problems with over the years. And there will be an episode coming up very soon with the top 10 controllers that I hate. That is coming, that is for sure. But today, the top 10 that I like. We're gonna start right here at the beginning for me, and it was the beginning of console gaming. Yes, I played the Atari. I didn't really like the controller too much, but this controller I liked, I loved, I fell in love with, like so many of you out there who tried this, the original Nintendo Entertainment Controller. Here, the NES Controller. This controller is the best. I mean, I spent so many nights, so many days playing this thing, and it only has 4 buttons, but that's all I needed. The B and A button, that's all I realistically ever used, and it felt good, it felt solid. And I gotta say something, at the time, this D-pad here, I mean, you couldn't wrap your head around it. We were using like joysticks at that time, coming off the Atari 2600, as I was saying. Never liked that stuff at all. And the D-pad, I was like, I don't understand this. I remember going to a friend's place down the road, seeing the controller, trying it out, and just pressing right on the D-pad, and Mario going and running down a hole, and I was like, oh, what do I just didn't get it. It was such a novelty, it was such a brand new idea, and all of the controllers after this would all have a D-pad. Isn't that fascinating? But in the beginning, it was a very brand new idea. Back in, like, when I played it, at least, was 1987. So the NES controller had to be in there. A lot of nostalgia, for sure, but I think it's the basis of all controllers that came afterwards, and I was really, really happy with it. Next up, okay, this is not a bait and switch, but in a way it is. I'm going to show it, the Genesis, the Sega Genesis 6-button controller here. I really like this, and they had to step up the game from the 3-button controller, and this was great because fighting games were coming out, and fighting games needed at that time, for like Street Fighter and such, you needed 6 buttons on there to do all the different moves, your punches and your kicks and all that. And this controller always felt really, really good, but this is not the one that I'm picking. It's not a bait and switch, but I guess it is. It is the original Sega Genesis controller that I got for that Christmas all those years ago. Why? Why would you say this one? Okay, there's gonna be a lot of jokes here. I know. There's gonna be a lot of jokes as soon as I start talking about this. The reason why I like this controller was because it was so big. It was so big. There's the joke. The buttons were so big. They were huge. I like big controllers. I like big buttons. This was awesome. It was novel at the time because look at this. We were coming off the NES. The NES was like a small controller, and all of a sudden the Genesis was like, look out, look at these giant buttons here. Look at the size of this controller. It was the Duke of the time, and it felt really good. And I think what realistically made it so good was when you hit one of these giant buttons and you saw your character on the screen do a maneuver, it was awesome because the character was as big as the buttons. I know that sounds like a strange concept to wrap your head around, but you had these huge buttons, and characters on the Genesis were bigger and were more arcade-like than we had gotten on the NES. And it was like, wow. It really felt like it was a solid controller, something that you definitely could wrap your hands around, and it felt really, really good. And I always have loved this controller. Yes, the 6-button one came out, and it is better, but I still, maybe it's the nostalgia talking, I like that original Genesis controller that Christmas, and I always used it. I always, Streets of Rage over the years, all of that. So much use out of this. Love it to death. Okay, this is an interesting one because the original design for this controller I didn't like. And I didn't have a Sega Saturn at the time, but my friend Rob did. And I went over there and I got to try out the original Sega Saturn controller right here. And the thing about this is not a very great controller. It's okay. It just felt really so angular and so unusual, and it worked, but it didn't feel, it didn't feel great. I mean, it just kind of, it was like, okay, this is the controller we have to use, so we used it, right? But I wasn't like going, oh, I really like this controller so much. It wasn't until it got a redesign, and let me say, the redesign was awesome. And one of my favorites right here, the Sega Saturn, this is the Japanese version right here. What makes it so much better? Smoother, more angular. It just felt so much nicer. I think the original one is kind of like just such sharp edges, and this one just felt so smooth around and really easy to pick up, and it felt good. Really nice for fighting games. Me and Rob played so much Street Fighter at his parents' place using these controllers, and it felt good. And I've always been a big fan of the Sega Saturn controllers. Love it. Now, we were coming off the original Xbox, remember that? And we had the Duke. I'm not even going to show it. That's probably going to be in that next episode I was talking about. But we were getting the Xbox 360, and with that, we were getting a brand new controller. And yes, they did the S controllers for the Xbox, but here it was, the Xbox 360 controller. What can I say about this one? I really liked it. It feels like it's got such a nice smooth finish to it. It feels like a very solid controller. I like the different colors here for the buttons. Very Super Famicom-ish. I like that. It felt good. And everything felt the way it should be. The D-pad was it's not the best D-pad for me, but it worked. And realistically, I was just using the analogs at the time for most games, except for fighting games. And I really like this controller. A bit of weight to it. Yeah, obviously with a battery in the back, but you can't go wrong with an Xbox 360 controller, and I've always really, really enjoyed this quite a lot. Now, I've snuck it in. Yes, I didn't forget about it. Me and Rob both agree this is one of our favorite controllers of all time, and that is for the Super Nintendo right here. Yes, I personally like the look of the Super Famicom controller better with the colored buttons. I think it looks nicer, but I like the contouring on the top two buttons right here. And I liked it. I don't know. I like the coloring of it. I always enjoyed the Super Famicom, but I liked what they did with the American one as well. It felt like it was tailored towards a different market. It wasn't just, the same one brought from Japan. They're like, oh no, we're going to change it a little bit. And I just love the shoulder buttons on here. I have so many of these controllers where the shoulder button has been broken, but this one's a really nice solid one right here. And perfect. And it was perfect for when Street Fighter got released on the Super Nintendo. This controller worked amazing, and I spent thousands of hours on the Super Nintendo in general, and this controller never let me down. Only I let myself down if I ever did anything, miscalculated anything in a game, where this is the controller that is so beautiful. And I think a lot of people from my generation will say the same thing. It was one of those ones that were coming off the NES, then we got to the Super Nintendo, and we're like, yep, you got it. Look at the amount of buttons you had at that time. Remarkable, and one that I still love to this day. Okay, there were a few wireless controllers that had come out by third parties, and I had never played one myself. I'd never played a wireless controller. I know. Look at all these controllers, right? All of them were wired. Most of them were wired at that time. And for the Nintendo, for the GameCube, something got released by Nintendo, and I'm like, I gotta pick this up, and I bought it day one. Here we go, and it's got a little smoke damage on it from back in the day. The Wavebird controller. This, for me, it's not the first wireless controller, but it was the first wireless controller I ever had. Can you believe it? They weren't widespread at that point. Every system didn't have a wireless controller, not at that time. But Nintendo all of a sudden was saying to everybody, this is the future. And after this, everybody quite literally did it. And is it the best controller? It's based on the GameCube controller, one that I have hit or miss with. I found the D-pad is just way too small. But the novelty here at that time was how far away from the screen you could get with your wireless controller. And I remember playing different games on the GameCube back then and going, I cannot believe I'm this far away from the TV. And I would test it. I would leave the room and be peeking in to see if it worked. And I was like, it's working, and it's working really, really well. And then after that, as I say, every console had a wireless controller, and we take it for granted now. But at the time, and now I know it sounds funny, it was like magic to me. It was like magic to me. This was showing us a bright new future, and one that was like, wow, I can't believe it. Now, this is interesting because all the next designs are all very, very similar, because I think we are reaching peak design with controllers, and these are all quite literally the same in a lot of ways. Here we go. The Nintendo Switch Pro Controller. This, to me, is a perfect controller. Look at this. The D-pad, the perfect size. The perfect size for fighting games. Analogs, right where they need to be. Everything is uniformed and where it should be, and it's perfect. When I first picked up the Pro Controller, it just was like, I didn't even think about it. It just worked. I wasn't like, oh, this is kind of hard to... Nope. It just worked. And this is the perfection for me with the controller. This is peak perfection for sure. I'm not saying they can't make better controllers in the future, but for me and what I want from a video game and all of that, that is not VR, that is not a Wiimote and all that, is this. This is what I want to play video games with. Dual analogs and shoulder buttons, my buttons right here. It just works out perfect for me. What do you guys think of the Switch Pro Controller? I love it. Okay, Microsoft is guilty of one thing, and that is releasing so many controllers during the Xbox time, especially into the Xbox One time. My God, I swear every week there's a brand new controller getting released. This is my favorite of all time for the Xbox One. I still use it right now on my Xbox Series X, and this is the Xbox One controller. Yes, this is the Sea of Thieves edition. This is the controller I use for playing all of my Xbox games, and I like it. Again, look at this. It's so funny how we've gotten to pretty much nearly peak controller design, and they follow each other so well. Look at that. It's pretty much nearly the same controller. Yes, we got feedbacks that are a little bit different here and stuff like that. It's not like you go from like the NES, right, to the Wavebird. Like, that's design difference right there, where all of a sudden we're getting unified controllers, and I'm happy about it. I really like the Xbox One controller, and going forward, yes, they've changed some things up with it and all of that, but the main controller is the same, and gotta say, they finally nailed it, and I'm really happy with this. At least it's not the Duke. Now, my next controller is a super favorite of mine. It's really grown on me in the last bunch of years. I spent, the entire PS4 lifespan playing it right here, the DualShock 4. Now, this is such a beautiful controller, and it's one of my favorite color on it as well. It's the one I always use. We were coming off the DualShock 2 and 3, these were great, absolutely great. And this is one of my favorite controllers of all time. I mentioned that in that video I did with Rob all those years ago. But you know what? I love this controller. It is perfect in every regard. I love this right here for clicking. I always enjoyed that, making gestures on it. But you know what? The DualShock wasn't busted. Why fix it? And they enhanced it, and they got it to peak performance for me. And this controller is good. It's really good. Why is it not my favorite of all time? It's a little bit light. But I'm not complaining. I think this is really good, and I always like how this lit up on you for different things. A little bit novelty, a little bit weird, but it was still kind of cool at the time. But what do you guys think of this controller? I mean, DualShock 4 is pretty damn awesome. Oh my God, we are at my favorite controller of all time, and it's a brand new one. And I fell in love with this. I'd heard about it. I heard it was gonna have all these features and all this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I've already had Rumble and all that over the years. Nothing's gonna surprise me. And I was completely surprised by the PS5 Controller. This is my favorite controller of all time, easily. And I'm gonna go through all the reasons why. I wanna say I like the grip here. It feels good, but I like the smoothness here. So it feels like you really are grabbing it, but it's the smoothness here. I like the buttons, all the glass buttons there. Isn't that cool? And the D-pad right here feels really responsive, and I've played some fighting games on it, and I really like it. I like that these buttons are really small and are kind of out of the way. Shoulder buttons, perfect, all of that stuff. And we've got our main screen here as well. Again, the touchpad. But what I love about it the most is it's got a bit of weight to it. And it feels solid, and it feels really good. And that leads into the next bit. The haptic feedback is awesome. And I thought it was going to be like, you know, you'd feel a little rumble here into here. You have to try one of these to experience what it's like, especially in certain games where you're like trying different guns and things like that, or different swords, and you feel the haptic feedback going through for like explosions and for shooting, and it feels amazing. I mean, I couldn't believe it when I first tried it out, and I was trying the demo that came with the PS5, and feeling the ball that's running through it, and you're kind of like moving it, and you can feel all these like marbles going through the controller, and you're like, this is not possible. And it's like, yeah, it is, and that's why this is set above for me. The haptic controls, the smoothness, how heavy it is, the glass buttons, the design. I like this, how it looks, the whiteness of it. It's really a cool design with the black and white balance there. It looks kind of futuristic, and it feels good, and it's a step up in the dual shocks for me. And it's like, for me, it's perfection. This, to me, is a 10 out of 10 controller. I remember picking it up for the first time, trying it out, going, this is unbelievable. This is really good. Now, don't get me wrong, I hate the look of the PS5, the machine itself. I think it sucks. I think it's just horrible looking. I think it's just mismanaged design. I think it's weird. I mean, how it sits on the side, it needs this little thing to sit on. I mean, it's just so dumb. So dumb. But the controller is awesome, and playing the games with the controller, fantastic. So big props for the PS5 controller. I think it's absolutely awesome. Guys, those are some of my lists. I know I could only get 10 in there. There's a lot of other controllers that I really like. I like the Master System controller. I like so many other controllers through the years that I just had to pick my favorites of all time, and I had to do that today. And I really enjoyed talking about all these controllers because I've used them not once, not twice, thousands of hours with all of them. So I've tested them out, like, you know, testing out a car. I've tested these out. I know the ups and downs of all of them, and I gotta say that this one for me is my favorite. What is your favorite controller of all time? Let me know down below. So anyways, guys, until next time.